Welcome back. I'm Tyler, you're watching the channel with my fracking name on it, and welcome to the 97th installment of Last Week Lolita News. I have tweaked this format from its original form of covering niche Japanese street fashion to encompassing the ever-revolving circus of horrors that can generously be called the state of US society, and with the news coverage of music festivals across multiple major cities being suppressed by certain absent sources, either from fear or outright capitulation for mutual profit, it's high time this channel used its accursed skill set to benefit the resistance instead of bedeviling foreign frock designers whose biggest crime is having the aesthetic talent of a silent flute. This concludes the heads up. Now let's start on what we're actually covering today, because what with global politics pulling a cha-cha slide to the right and a near ubiquitous feed of bad, terrible, awful news being shoved into our eyeballs from all sectors at all hours of the day and night, because the inventor of the 24-hour news cycle was allowed to be born instead of rightfully becoming a backshot before being tossed into the bin, what was already an absolutely exhausting psychological endurance test of how many of the world's ills one could hear about before developing shorter telomeres and an equally diminutive will to live, has ratcheted up to an up-close and personal litany of threats so constantly evolving that overwhelm is a foregone conclusion. And the funny thing is that that's exactly what a tyrannical regime wants. A barrage of cartoonishly abhorrent acts in hopes of demotivating and dividing the efforts of an oppressed populace is a strategy as old as whatever ancient evil is animating the meat suit that calls itself Mitch McConnell. They're hoping that you'll wear yourself and any hope for the future thin. And while this may come off as incredibly counterproductive, the first thing you need to admit to yourself if you have any intent to make a difference in this fight is that you're damned tired. That constantly filling your memory banks with god-awful information on global and national decline without pause becomes masochistic after the third mental breakdown with no actual attempt to engender change based off the things you've learned, let alone pause to take care of yourself. The only way this whole resistance thing is going to make an actual impact is if everyone participating starts treating it like shift work, because there is not enough monster energy in the world to keep you on the front lines forever without respite. And the true longevity of what we aim to achieve isn't exactly going to be accomplished if all of you start dropping like flies, because a hustle culture grindset has some online shaming people for not taking a daily tear gas canister to the crotch. Every last one of us has a part to play in the fight for who and what we love, along with the responsibility of respecting our personal needs for rest and care. Rest and care includes enjoying things that are not supposed to be productive. And now that you've been given both permission to breathe and take a second to assess the state of your likely incredibly neglected emotional and physical health, I'd like you to use those singed little brain cells of yours for the good of yourself and others by sitting down with a little piece of paper, your phone, or a receptive cat, and I want you to list out whatever hobbies or interests make you feel even a smidgen of positive brain chemicals like your life depends on it, because it kind of does. Related video on unmitigated stress and its consequences here. No pressure though, just know that I and your cat will be judging you if you leave out a single thing because someone told you it's too frivolous, stupid, childish, or not productive enough for an adult to be interested in, because people like that certainly aren't living in a beige prison of their own making and absolutely won't be immediately forgotten about the moment they die because they left the lasting impression of packing tape. For example, I have enjoyed a specific branch of Japanese street fashion for over a decade now, and I recently picked up Magic the Gathering because I wanted to see how close I could get to being the fanciest person to ever take up residence in their car. My bank account has thus far let every purchase resolve to my detriment, but the dopamine I get from cheating a card onto the field without using the stack makes the stacks I'm losing virtually painless, and looking at my ridiculously saturated dresses is a decent reminder that whimsy still exists in a world that seems overly saturated with matters too serious to encapsulate without screaming for a socially unacceptable amount of time. And to further underline the importance of engaging in positive activities in the face of ever-mounting odds, we're going to move on to section 2 entitled, "That's right, this thing has sections, now take my stubborn refusal to accommodate any of my needs as a cautionary tale." The preamble for that tale is incredibly long, so I'm going to summarize it with undiagnosed ADHD spawned lifelong depression, later anhedonia, and an utter burnout in that order. A brush with death from stress-induced stomach issues followed, my brain that was fogged to the brink already then had related nutritional deficiencies thrown on top. Healing took 5 ever, an ADHD diagnosis cost 500, and just like magic, all it took to beat the entire shebang in with a shovel and restore my interest in life was a few little pills and the signature of someone whose handwriting looks interpretive at best. Which was great until the Fire Nation attacked, I took an arrow to the knee, and then the wolves came in ways that wouldn't excite furries but would absolutely titillate the sociopathic cameraman responsible for shooting National Geographic. Which is to say, in brief, I got well again just in time for my relationship to fall apart and lose my home, family, cat, lifestyle, car, and health in one fell swoop. The immense stress, of course, reset the progress made on my stomach, meaning the medication medication I had finally gotten a hold of wasn't an option for me unless I fancied paying out the nose for pills I couldn't absorb. And pain I wouldn't wish on anyone unless they played notion thief, which in layman terms is the type of person who heard the tale of the little red hen and their takeaway was, actually, let's just steal the bread because we weren't beaten enough as a child. So did I, an ostensibly sensible human being, take in the severity of my circumstances, everything I'd lost, and come to the very obvious conclusion that I would need time to rest and recover from having life run me down with a city bus, back it up, and then nearly finish the job? Of course not. Did I instead spend the past months mentally beating the shit out of myself while trying and failing to get anything done whatsoever, worsening the stress I was under, and putting myself in the mental space to be at risk of ending up on the local news? I'm afraid that's entirely classified, but what I will say is that at no point in the entirety of that time did pushing myself without rest lead to anything good. Not for me, not for the world that seemed to be burning down around me, and not for the people that cared if I lived or took an unhealthy interest in the height of the local bridge. And it was only after an embarrassing amount of failure to accomplish anything of note, day in and day out, an overwhelming amount of grief, and finally acceptance that I couldn't go on doing this to myself, that I set down my unreasonable expectations and let go of the identity that had been lost to me. This is the point in the video where I want any of you identifying with this story to listen really close so you might save yourself some trouble, because the reality of going through some whack shit and actually growing from it requires that you admit the following. Whoever you were before everything happened, and whatever you would have been capable of, isn't who you are now. Because that person doesn't exist anymore, and pretending to be a version of yourself that hasn't gone through what nearly destroyed you isn't going to give you what you need to heal. Expecting yourself to be and perform the same after a traumatic event often leads to a form of self-gaslighting that can prevent you from giving yourself proper accommodations and care in the aftermath. I spent way too long in that stage while doing my best impression of a self-hating paperweight, and after countless days of doing the same thing and expecting different results, I finally realized that what I actually needed was rest. I needed to let go of what I was supposed to be like, and I let myself lay down those expectations and address the exhaustion that I had been ignoring all this time. First, starting with foods that wouldn't stress my body and prioritizing adequate sleep, I let go of any idea of what a proper timeline for progress looked like, used mindless distraction techniques like reading books, manga, and movies to mitigate the spiraling from anhedonia and depression as best I could. Second, as my physical health began to improve, I reintroduced things I used to enjoy, like dancing, cycling, and other exercise-based hobbies, benefiting from both the exertion, increasing the feel-good chemicals in my brain, and the confirmation that I could enjoy something again, which definitely beat anhedonia, making me view all my options like cream of wheat, wherein to the left you have incredibly bland, and to the right the most outstanding shade of beige you've ever seen. And third, I let go of my guilt of being unproductive, began hanging out with my friends again, and said no without a shred of regret to anything that unnecessarily added stress to my daily life. Which sounds a lot like woman discovers basic self-care and is shocked at results. But we both know you're no better than me. The algorithm sat your ass here for a reason, so maybe don't throw rocks in your glass house. Oh, excuse me, I meant glass apartment, because you're liable to hit one of your 3 roommates or an appliance that hasn't been fixed since the investment firm started buying up single-family homes like Beanie Babies for comparable market stability. Back to what we were talking about, the whole self-care process wasn't perfect. I was still living in a post-traumatic state with unmedicated ADHD, depression, and anhedonia, fighting my will to live in a 3-on-1 cage match I don't know that I'd have won if the people around me hadn't helped me in so many different ways. I owe so much of my progress to the support of my partner, friends, and all of you in my community who extended your hands when I was sure that my time was up. And eventually, I recovered enough to stop raw-dogging my neurochemical settings, take my ADHD medication again, and here I sit once more before you, a functioning member of society, newly restored and intent on using my skill set to undermine the executive branch. Too long didn't listen, it took letting go of the unreasonable expectation that I could just force myself to keep going in order to build myself into someone who actually can. The same is absolutely true for you right now. Which is a good place to move on to section 3, what the hell did this have to do with hobbies again, and how am I supposed to say that Magic the Gathering improved my mental health without having people question said mental health for incredibly understandable reasons. I told you exactly how grim my circumstances were in order to get you to consider your own and underline how impactful hobbies can be in recovery from immense stress and traumatic bullshit. And when properly prioritized along with a holistic approach, your little pastimes are far more important to your well-being than you might think. Case in point, 3 months ago, in the darker parts of my incredibly slow recovery, back when the brain fog and distress was at its peak, I couldn't take my medication for it, and it was nigh impossible for anything to provoke my interest, let alone keep it. I was politely and steadily pressured into playing a certain card game in the way one might proffer a squeezy treat to an untrusting cat, which is to say with appropriate caution so that they don't go all knives for hands and tell you to find a different doorstep to darken under threat of imminent stabbery. This is unhinged, for I was not exactly jumping at the chance to go buy cardboard when I was trying my best not to do a cannonball off the mortal coil, and they were super respectful about that, which is the reason they're still breathing. However, because they're a scheming schemer with the patience of a fracking sequoia, I found myself entering a local game store of my own volition, and after sifting through a bunch of cute, aesthetically appealing decks that didn't interest me, to the surprise of both of us, I picked up a Commander Precon featuring a massive holographic serpent that may as well have been called Big Snake Go Burr. The strategy it offered seemed straightforward enough that I'd be able to pilot it, even with the immense brain fog and the attention span to match. And we picked out sleeves and a deck box to go with it, which contained a little window to showcase my serpent, hold dice, and house the cards inside, since apparently storing your things in a proper receptacle is what separates you from people who show up with sandwich bags and intent to do actual psychic damage with their shuffle. I was taught how to play shortly afterward, and for reasons I still don't understand, I went from mildly curious about the game to absolutely obsessed with strategizing, researching what was available, updating my decks, and learning about new interactions with each game. I don't know if I was interacting with the game too consistently due to social saturation for anticipatory anhedonia to have time to make it sound unappealing, or ADHD was mediating it by taking hyperfixation and running me straight into bankruptcy, but I was so caught up in the process of hunting down cards, editing, and playing my decks that it took me a little bit to notice that my memory was returning. The brain fog was gradually clearing as I challenged myself with complex interactions and rules of play based on whatever unfamiliar factor I was being met with during each new game. The consistent game nights and events encouraged me to meet and talk with new people, as well as hang out with those I already knew. And now, 3 months in, my attention span is better than it's been in half a decade. My working, short, and long-term memory are intact, and my eyes don't glaze over unless someone starts defending mill strategies like that isn't the most boring way to win any game ever, second only to the stacks player who shows up just to play solitaire because it's one of the few legal ways to hold 3 people hostage without being imprisoned for your crimes. That statement of fact aside, I've since changed out 54 cards in that first deck, built 2 more, and purchased a second pre-made one after the ones I created sowed so much discord in my playgroups that petitions were made for me to possess something less designed to induce a loss of faith in the innate goodness of mankind. I take my ADHD medication without issue, exercise regularly, and I mean it when I say that when combined with a focus on my physical and mental health and support from my community, allowing myself to indulge in a hobby and thus playing Magic the Gathering was definitely a large factor in my recovery. That's a sentence that you wouldn't have been able to get out of me at gunpoint a year prior, but I'm not above giving credit where credit is due, and the fact remains that beyond giving me a thinly defensible way to inflict an acute sense of dread on whoever sits across from me, this game gave me an avenue to learn new skills and hone ones that had gotten rusty after years of moldering away in an unhealthy stasis. It provided a much-needed outlet for rest and restoration that allowed me to take breaks from the struggles I was up against in order to play. I had and am having a lot of fun along the way, and I've been fortunate to have a local community of players who are both welcoming to newcomers and provide a range of strategies to test my decks against. Mind you, that comes with its own challenges, because editing your deck with a game shop in mind is going to get you cards that would be considered immoral at a table full of people you have to see again in polite circumstances. So I'm still working on what the line is between proper preparation and casting the cardboard equivalent of a cannon, but I'm sure things will level out before someone flips a table. And now that we're at our 4th and final section, I'd like to welcome you to the part of the video where I encourage you to tell everyone about your favorite hobbies and pastimes in the comments below, because I think in these especially stressful times, it's incredibly easy to forget about all the things that make our lives feel like our own. Remembering that there are good things in this world and that they are part of the reason we are fighting so hard is equally good for the spirit, and if we're going to weather the test coming our way, it's better to do so with what we cherish and love front and center, refusing to let them be smothered to the benefit of those that would do us harm. You are not a machine. You need just as much rest and enrichment as any other animal on this planet. And if you are going to be of any use to yourself and others as we face the challenges coming our way, you're going to have to occasionally fritter about like an off-leash Cocker Spaniel. I'll release those of you who'd rather do anything else from my grasp. This has been Tyler. You've been watching the channel with my fracking name on it. I'd like to thank my patrons for their eternal faith that I haven't just wandered off into the woods, never to return again. And should you like to join their number and cause more things like this to be put in front of people's eyeballs and or aid in the attempt to bedevil the powers that be, you can head over to patreon.com/lastweeklolitanews for more content, early releases, and whatever nonsense I've decided to post that day. No promises you won't need therapy afterward. Thanks again, guys, and I'll catch you next time.